So first on our track is Jacob Bielinski, and he's with Alamo Council of Governments, and he's going to talk on behalf of Diagnosis, Services, Crisis, IDD, CCU, and Guardianship. Mr. Jacob Bielinski, he's a Senior Director of IDD Services for Alamo Area Council of Governments. He has had over 10 years working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and comorbid disorders. Jacob has a Master of Science in Mental Health Counseling, a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, and his credentials include Licensed Professional Counselor, National Certified Counselor, and he is a Certified HIPAA Professional. He has served Acog in various capacities, including Director and Assistant Director of IDD Services. He currently serves on the Service and Coordination Subcommittee with Texas Health and Human Service Commission State Medicaid Managed Care Advisory Committee. Jacob, take the floor, sir. It's all yours. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for that awesome introduction. Let me get my slides on the screen for you guys. And hopefully y'all are able to see that. I'm seeing nods, yes, okay, awesome. So my name is Jacob Bielinski. I'm the Senior Director of Intellectual and Developmental Disability Services and Agency Coordination with the Alamo Area Council of Governments. And to begin with this morning, I just want to introduce y'all a little bit to the Alamo Area Council of Governments. There's a joke that still runs around that Acog is the best kept secret in Bexar County. And so we want to make sure that you know who Acog is and kind of what we do at a high level. So Acog is a unit of local government with no taxation authority. So all of our programs, all the work that we do comes through either state or federal grants. And we cover a 13 county region that includes Bexar and the surrounding rural counties, covering almost 13,000 square miles and over 2.5 million individuals. And so as a Council of Governments, we have representatives from each of the counties as well as the municipalities that are members of Acog. And so those elected officials form our board of directors, and they guide the programs and the functions that Acog performs for the region. So just to go over a few of the different programs that we provide, starting with our programs designed for services to residents. We are the area agency for aging, both for the Bexar County area and the surrounding 12 counties. And through that program, Acog is able to provide services to individuals 60 years of age and over in order to support them to continue to successfully live in the community. We always want to support individuals to age in place. And so our area agency on aging really focuses on supporting individuals that are aging and as well as veterans on connecting to the services and supports that they may need in order to age in place in the community and remain outside of institutions. And then we have our Intellectual and Developmental Disability Services, which is the unit that I head. That program is specific to Bexar County. And we serve as the public front door for services and supports for intellectual and developmental disabilities. So anyone that's seeking services, looking for residential options, supports, respite, we'll go more into the details of all of those here in a minute, but that would, everybody would come through our front door for that service. We also operate a regional transportation authority. So while VIA is the transportation authority in Bexar County, our Alamo Regional Transit is the transportation authority for the 12 surrounding counties. And they're able to provide regular service as well as paratransit service in that 12 county region. And then we have a weatherization assistance and energy conservation program as well to help individuals that are low income weatherize their homes so they can save money, not have to spend those monies on things like air conditioning or running the refrigerator so that they can better afford other daily needs. And then we move into our services that we provide more to government agencies. So one of the big areas that we support is law enforcement agencies, including we have an academy on site to train law enforcement officers, as well as we coordinate Homeland Security grants, criminal justice grants, and operate a regional 911 program for a number of our member county governments. We also provide regional services to coordinate block grants, FEMA. We work closely with JBSA as well to help the local government support the different missions at Joint Base San Antonio. And then we also have our Environmental Conservation and Natural Resources Department. So if you get those air quality alerts that's saying it's going to be a high ozone day, that's triggered by Acog and the ozone quality and air quality monitoring that Acog performs. So having given you that overview of Acog, I do want to dive in more specifically into intellectual and developmental disabilities. So an intellectual disability is a disability that results from a person having an IQ below 70. Most individuals have a significantly higher IQ. That's the majority of the population. And so when we're talking about intellectual disabilities, we're talking really about 69 and below in Texas. And it is important that decreased cognitive functioning, that decreased intellectual functioning be documented to occur prior to the age of 18. It has to begin during the developmental period. Otherwise, it's not considered a developmental disability. It's something that's acquired later in life. We are also able to serve individuals with autism spectrum disorder, which of course many of you are probably familiar with. Autism spectrum disorder has been getting quite a bit more recognition in the news media and on TV lately, and so it's much more well known. And then we're able to serve individuals through early childhood interventions. Once they age out of ECI, that early childhood intervention, if they're still in need of supports, they are really automatically eligible at that point for services through Acog as the local IDD authority. And then we work closely with nursing facilities as well, and individuals with what we call a related condition. And so a related condition is a list of hundreds of different developmental and medical disorders that result in a lifelong need for care for a person. So that may be something like spina bifida, or cerebral palsy, or Down syndrome, and the list just goes on and on. So when we're talking about specifically the intellectual disability, we're looking at a person who may struggle to work with things like conceptual skills, language, reading, math, reasoning, or social skills, which you see a lot with autism spectrum disorder. A difficulty with social judgment, interpersonal communications. You'll see people parrot behaviors that they think you may want to see from them. And then we also see difficulty with self-management, things like making decisions about activities of daily living, or job responsibilities, or money management. So all of these are areas where an individual with an intellectual disability or developmental disability may struggle. So with our intellectual disabilities, one of the common misconceptions we see and we hear from the community is that somebody with an intellectual disability isn't able to make their own decisions, or maybe they need total care. And that really is a myth about intellectual disabilities. So on the screen right now, you see a breakdown. We classify intellectual disabilities as mild, moderate, severe, and profound. And so 95% of intellectual disabilities fall within the mild and moderate categories. And so these are individuals that are perfectly able to live successfully in the community, able to hold jobs, able to maybe manage their own monies and bank accounts, but they maybe need support in order to do so. And they can really blend in the community with other individuals, and you'd never know that this person has a special need of some sort. And so I think that's something that's important to throw out there, and a myth that's important to bust, because these are individuals that just want to be included and accepted and treated like everybody else. And then we get into our severe and profound, which you can see is a much reduced percentage of individuals with intellectual disability. And those are individuals that really need generally a much more intense level of care. They're individuals that need assistance with their basic activities of daily living. They need assistance dressing or eating or preparing food on a regular basis. And so these are folks that you're really going to more find in a group home or in an intermediate care facility, something that more resembles an institutional setting, because they're really needing significantly more support on a daily basis. So it's important to note that those percentages I just talked about occur within the intellectual disability population. And that intellectual disability population generally, statistically speaking, is between 1 to 3% of the general population as a whole. And we don't necessarily know what causes intellectual disabilities. Sometimes it's genetic factors at play. There's suspicion that there may be environmental factors, but that has yet to be firmly proven. Sometimes it can be maybe injuries or things that occur during the developmental period. For example, back 20, 30 years ago, it was standard practice during difficult deliveries for doctors to use a specialized kind of forceps to help deliver the baby if the mother was having trouble delivering the baby naturally. But what they found was that sometimes resulted in brain injuries to children and increased results of intellectual disabilities. And so that changed medical practice, and doctors, that's no longer standard practice for doctors to do that. So we just really don't know, is the point, what causes some of these disabilities. But we do know that they're individuals that need supports and deserve the opportunity to live in the community. So then we move into our developmental disabilities. And I will say that an intellectual disability is one diagnostic category within an overall grouping of developmental disabilities. And so that developmental disability label is much more broad and includes both the intellectual disability as well as autism spectrum disorder, as well as many of those different related conditions that I mentioned earlier. And so individuals with developmental disabilities have to be diagnosed, or they have to at least have the evidence of symptoms occurring prior to the age of 22. So once you hit the age of 22, that's the end of a person's developmental period when their brain is still actively changing and developing. And so after we hit that mark of 22, symptoms that present after that point are no longer considered potentially a developmental disability. So it really is important that we get individuals into either Acog as the local IDD authority or in to see a doctor to document, or schools are really another great source to document symptoms prior to the age of 22 so that we're able to qualify individuals for those publicly funded services. Individuals with developmental disabilities are expected to need lifelong services and supports and may struggle with things like language, mobility, learning, self-help, etc. We have a slide in here on autism spectrum disorder. Again, autism spectrum disorder is individuals are expected to need those same kinds of assistance, but the cluster of symptoms, what they struggle with, is going to focus more on those social interactions, the communication interactions, difficulty understanding and reading nonverbal cues and body language, difficulty maintaining age-appropriate friendships. And so those individuals need supports in order to overcome those obstacles in their life. And then again, I mentioned the related conditions. We're talking about things like epilepsy, Down syndrome, Fragile X, fetal alcohol syndrome, muscular dystrophy. All of those and many, many more, all of those are diagnoses where the person's expected to need that lifelong support. And again, they must be things that have their onset and begin to occur prior to that age of 22. And so for this diagnostic group of developmental disabilities, Acog is able to conduct enrollments into a number of programs. So we work with nursing facilities, we work with intermediate care facilities, which is essentially the equivalent to a nursing facility, but specifically for the IDD population. An intermediate care facility may look more like a nursing facility, like an institutional setting, or it may look more like a 3 or 4 bed home in the community. So they can take multiple different forms and range in scale from that 4-bed group home size to something as large as the state supported living center like we have here in San Antonio. Then we also have a number of community-based programs. And so I'm going to start with Community First Choice, and then we'll talk about our general revenue funded services. And then we will get into our Medicaid waiver programs, Texas Home Living, and home and community-based services. We also provide service coordination, or what we call targeted case management, throughout all of these program areas. And so once we're able to determine a person is eligible for services, we're able to provide ongoing targeted case management for the rest of that person's life. Unfortunately, the only funding source for IDD services is Medicaid. Private insurances do not cover IDD services and supports. Medicare does not cover them, and so the Texas Medicaid program is the only funder for services. Then on the right side of your screen here, you also will see a couple of additional services that we provide, things like a determination of intellectual disability, which is a psychological evaluation and what we use to determine a person eligible for long-term services and supports, or IDD services and supports. We also provide consumer benefits assistance for the person to assist them with accessing Medicaid or accessing Social Security and Medicare benefits. We operate the waiver interest lists for both Texas Home Living and home and community-based services, and I'll talk more about those interest lists here in a minute. And then we have some specialty program areas as well. Community Living Options Information Process is one where we're explaining community living to individuals that are residing in the state supported living center that may not have an understanding of what it looks like to live in the community and outside of an institutional setting. We work with permanency planning to make sure that individuals under the age of 23 that are living in an institution, that there's a plan for that person. We want to ensure that the plan for the person is not just constantly living in an institution. We try to identify if there's a pathway to move that person into the community in the future. And then we have enhanced community coordination and crisis respite. And those are both programs to better support individuals either who are transitioning out of an institution and into the community, or in the case of crisis, to help avoid institutionalization by identifying and then supporting and managing crises as they occur in the community. So for someone that you may have that you're looking to refer for services, or maybe you're not sure if they're in services or not because you're not able to get the information you need from the person, the best number to call is 210-832-5020. That number is answered by a call center here at Acog. where they can triage your call and then connect you with the right unit. Calling in on that line is going to get you contact with our intake team, who can help identify if the person is currently in services, or if they need to be connected to services for the first time and complete an application process. And so during our intakes, our team works with the individual and the family to collect a large number of records, hospital records, nursing facility records, school records, criminal justice records, anything and everything that we can find to help support their diagnoses. And then our psychologist also meets with the individual and conducts that psychological evaluation. Normally, a full psychological evaluation can take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. So it's not a quick process. It involves a clinical diagnostic interview, as well as intellectual testing and adaptive behavioral testing. It functions a little bit differently than some of you that may be more familiar with an intake process for a mental health service. That intake process is a little more quick, right? It primarily consists of that diagnostic interview with the person. But for IDD services, it's a bit more involved in order to determine the person is eligible for service. We do have an ability to pay scale that we work with individuals on. If the person has Medicaid, then Medicaid covers all IDD services. And if the person does not have Medicaid, then they can have an ability to pay depending on their individual financial situation. And then in that intake process as well, we work to get individuals onto the home and community-based services and Texas Home Living interest lists. So in Texas, the legislature does not provide sufficient funding for anybody that wants one of those two Medicaid waiver programs to be enrolled and receive the program. And so because of that, we have what's called an interest list. It's not a wait list, and the legal distinction there is a wait list. The person has already been determined eligible for services. And so we in Texas have an interest list. So anybody that wants to gets to raise their hand and sign up for the list in the hopes that they'll be eligible when their name comes up and they get their offer. For home and community-based services, our list is getting really close to 15 years long at this point in time. Just the sheer number of individuals that are interested and the limited amount of funding that the legislature puts towards intellectual and developmental disability services. So having said that, though, I don't want you guys to freak out and think that there's no way to get folks into services. We do have, again, other service programs besides the 2 waiver programs that someone can get into more timely. And then depending on triage need, crises, criminal justice involvement, we do have mechanisms that we can triage a person into those Medicaid programs if necessary, and we work through HHSC to try to make that happen when it's needed. So this slide talks a little bit more about the DID. I've talked really about that already, so we'll go ahead and move on here. Once the DID or the determination of intellectual disability is completed by the psychologist, then the individual gets notified of the results, whether they're eligible for services or not eligible for services, and then we work on enrolling into specific programs. I mentioned that we also provide consumer benefits and assist the person with applying for Texas Medicaid, as well as Social Security and Medicare.
Yes. Your attorney, your client's talking now. Okay.
So our first program that we want to dive into is called Community First Choice. And so Community First Choice really is a relatively new floor to intellectual and developmental disability services. This program does require that an individual have Medicaid and that it be a managed Medicaid. But as long as they have managed Medicaid, which is 98% of individuals with Medicaid right now, then they're eligible for community first choice once we've completed that determination of intellectual disability. And community first choice is able to provide personal assistance services, habilitation, and emergency response services in the person's home, as well as in the community. So I want to kind of go into what those services are a little bit. So personal assistance is exactly what it sounds like. It's somebody that's in the home assisting with activities of daily living. That may be cleaning or cooking and food prep, simple dressing, bathing, simple things around the house like that. Habilitation. So many of you are probably familiar with the word rehabilitation. And so rehabilitation is assisting a person to regain or rebuild skills that they used to have or they were presumed to have had, right? Habilitation is about teaching a person skills for the first time. And so in IDD services, our services are all habilitation focused. And so we're working on teaching and developing skills. And that's a significant difference, say, from maybe the mental health side of things where, or even nursing facilities where the services are really more focused on rehabilitation and getting a person through recovery and back to their previous level of functioning. And then emergency response services is something like a call button. So the person has a way to call for assistance if there's a problem that occurs in the home. Our next program is our general revenue funded services, or what we call our safety net services. So the state gives us a small bucket of general revenue dollars in order to provide a safety net in the community and prevent situations of abuse, neglect, exploitation from occurring, to prevent people from falling through the cracks. We don't receive a lot of dollars for this, but it is a small bucket. And so for individuals that were able to enroll into this general revenue funded safety net program, in addition to our case management, they're able to the person's able to receive supports like community support, which again, that's very on par with the personal assistance service, except there is a training component involved. They can also access now Respite for the first time. So we're able to give the caregiver a break from providing that daily support for the person. So the caregiver can refill their own emotional and physical needs so that they can then continue to be a better caregiver for the person. We also provide employment supports and services. These can be both pre-vocational as well as vocational services to help maintain the person in a job once they are in that role. Then we have day habilitation, which is a site-based habilitation program. So it's almost can look like an extension of a school where individuals are coming together in a single location and then they're working on skill development at that site. Then we provide behavior supports, which I think is probably one of our other most, aside from Respite, was one of the most significant services that we're able to offer. And so for individuals that have behaviors that might lead to them getting in trouble somewhere, or behaviors that are not socially appropriate, or behaviors that might endanger themselves or others, we're able to provide behavioral supports and connect the person with a behavioral specialist that can work with them to train and develop their skills to hopefully be more socially appropriate, less potentially harmful, whatever the case may be for the person. And then we're also able to offer some additional specialized therapies. So those specialized therapies can be things like speech and language, can be applied behavioral analysis, can be potentially OT, PT, nursing services in order to support the person in their home and in the community. In our safety net service program, we do have service level caps. So basically the person gets up to $3,500 for service in the year, which does not go a long way for adults, or $2,000 of service for a year for a child. And the reason the child amount is less is because it's anticipated that the person's receiving services and supports through their school, because schools do receive specific dollars to help support individuals with special needs, with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so then our general revenue safety net would wrap around whatever the school is providing through that person's individualized education plan. And then we go into our Medicaid waivers program. So Texas Home Living is our first Medicaid waiver program. Already you can see that it's a huge jump in level of service for the person, because now instead of having a cap of $2,000 to $3,000 of service for the year, they can receive up to $17,000 worth of service for the year. So this is a Medicaid funded program, and the individual is able to access this program once they've moved through one of those interest lists and been offered a slot. In addition to our service coordination or targeted case management, the person can receive respite, habilitation, behavior supports, employment services, both as employment assistance, which is the pre-vocational skills, and then supported employment, which is, if you will, the post-vocational skills, nursing, adaptive aids, if the person needs a wheelchair or a walker, or any other aid that might be able to support them in doing their activities of daily living, interacting in the community, that can be covered through this program, as well as minor home modifications. So things like remodeling a shower so that it's easier and safer for the person to access, or wheelchair ramps, maybe widening doorways, minor home modifications can be covered. And then this is the first time that dental services can be covered for the person, the first program that we get into. Many times individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities have really bad oral hygiene. And that's because of temperature sensitivity and sensitivity to textures, not understanding what's going on when, you know, someone's trying to help them brush their teeth. And so they just really tend to have poor oral hygiene to begin with. And then taking that person to the dentist can really become an extreme event when that person doesn't understand the importance of going to the dentist, or why this person's digging around in my mouth with sharp tools. I mean, going to the dentist causes anxiety for a lot of us when we're laying there in the chair being worked on. So I can only imagine how much stress that would cause somebody that doesn't totally understand what's maybe occurring, or isn't able to communicate their anxiety or concerns about the situation. And so many times individuals with IDD will need to be sedated in order to have proper oral hygiene and care conducted by them.
Well, she didn't have it anymore.
Then we also have specialized therapies. And again, those can be things in this program, things like audiology, dietary, speech language, and OTPT. And so then we move into our final program, which is our home and community-based services. And this is the big Cadillac of our Medicaid waiver programs. And the reason it's referred to that way is because this is the first program that includes a residential option. So this is the program that can pay for an individual to be in a host home or companion care. You may call it like a foster care setting. This program will also pay for the individual to be in a 3 or 4 bed group home. So many individuals look to eventually enroll in this program because as they grow and their needs change as they transition from being a child to an adult, you know, when a person turns 18, mom and dad are no longer legally required to care for them. And so this provides an option to the individual to continue living in the community and receive the supports they need, especially if they need supports in the home or they need somewhere to live. The plan of care or the service level that the person can receive as far as funding dollars go can be into the hundreds of thousands. The most recent average that we have seen is about $83,000 a year, but that's really because of that residential option. And then again, you can see we have a much more expanded array of services here, looking at adaptive aids and dental. Many of these are the same as with Texas Home Living, but you can see that it does include the residential assistance or residential options, as well as an expanded list of specialized therapies. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about intermediate care facilities for a moment. I mentioned them earlier as far as being kind of like that group home and anywhere in size from 4 bedrooms in the community to up to this big institution. And what's important to note here is that intermediate care facilities are an entitlement service. So anyone with Medicaid can enroll directly into an intermediate care facility. Now, saying that, that doesn't mean that there's no processing time, right? That we could put someone in an intermediate care facility tomorrow, because all of these intermediate care facilities are owned by private businesses, and basically they determined who they accept into their intermediate care facility and who would be a good fit in that particular residence. And so the way that process works is we determine that eligibility, then we put together a packet and send that out to all of the group homes, or all of the ICFs, I should say, in the area the person desires to live. And then those homes, those intermediate care facilities, get back to us and let us know if they're willing to accept the person or not, if they think that it would be a good fit. So while it is an entitlement program, there is a bit of a process that goes with that in order to enroll into an intermediate care facility. We also work closely with nursing facilities for individuals with that intellectual disability, developmental disability, or related condition that might meet a nursing facility level of care. And so once the person's enrolled into the nursing facility, we receive an alert from all the nursing facilities in the area in Bexar County, and we go out and assess the individual for that potential intellectual or developmental disability and are able to get them enrolled into services from that point. And while they are in the nursing facility, they do qualify for additional specialized services and supports. And so those services and supports really focus around things like rehabilitation and employment services, and then community activities and socialization for the person. And so we work closely with the nursing facilities on that. And then we also work to transition individuals out of nursing facilities back into the community when they have the desire to, and they don't need that nursing facility level of medical care any longer. And so when we do that transition, they move through a program called Enhanced Community Coordination. And so Enhanced Community Coordination provides an additional level of support for the person. So in addition to just the regular service coordination, they have an enhanced community coordinator that kind of monitors and navigates their case for a full year after they transition. That enhanced community coordinator gets involved the moment the person raises their hand and says, hey, I'm interested in moving to the community, and then follows that person throughout the process for a year afterwards in order to make sure that that's a successful transition. They're receiving the supports and services they need in order to be successful in the community, so that we don't have recidivism and end up seeing the person back into a nursing facility. We also have a support and empowerment program. So this is a grant we received through Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities. It's an educational program to help individuals and their aging caregivers live healthier lives. And so it provides education and empowerment on health, finance, spiritual needs, caregiving, physical fitness, etc. Really focused on being more independent and healthy. And then our crisis services. And so many of our criminal justice folks that may be on the call today are maybe more familiar with this. And so we have 2 crisis intervention assessors for the Bexar County region. I know that's not a lot, but that's the funding we get at the moment. And we try to make the best of it and really help support the community by identifying crises and then mitigating them by behavior therapies and connecting the individual and family with crisis respite. So our crisis respite can occur in 2 different ways. We have what we call 72-hour teams, our crisis teams that we can send out into the person's home. And so that's sending out a behavior therapist and behavior technician that can do a continuous 72-hour period in the person's home to help address behaviors and help stabilize the system. Because many of the times when we see behaviors in individuals, the behaviors are not necessarily a problem with that person. It's really more a problem with the system. The person's trying to communicate and the people supporting or caring for the person aren't understanding how the person's communicating. Or the caregivers are engaging in specific behaviors that are antagonistic to the individual, depending on the situation. And so those 72-hour teams really work both with the person as well as that family system or caregiver system in the home, doing behavior therapy on both sides. So that it's a more stable environment to help this person be successful and minimize the crisis in place. The other method that we provide crisis respite is we do have a small home here in Bexar County that is a 4-bed crisis respite facility where we're able to support up to 4 individuals at a time who are having a behavioral crisis. And I do want to be specific in, what differentiates, say, an IDD behavioral crisis from a mental health crisis. Most of you are probably familiar with the definition of a mental health crisis here in Bexar County, and that is not what an IDD crisis is. When we're talking about IDD crisis, we're not talking about suicidal or homicidal ideation. We're talking about behaviors that are non-psychiatrically driven that may be resulting in the potential for harm to the person or to someone else. Also, a person at risk of losing their residential placement or losing, the place they're staying can also be eligible for IDD crisis because we want to make sure that that person is not on the streets and that they're in a safe and supportive environment. So I want to stress that individuals with IDD can really be found anywhere in the community. They may be in group homes, they may be in that host home or companion care that you may hear called a foster care setting. They may be in their own home. They may be in nursing facilities or intermediate care facilities or the state supported living center or crisis care. And so individuals with IDD really are everywhere. They go to school, they participate in site-based programs throughout the county, they volunteer, they work jobs. And so anywhere you go, you are very likely to run into and meet somebody that may have an intellectual or developmental disability. Specific with the criminal justice system, we know that individuals with IDD interact with criminal justice at an increased rate from the general population. Researchers have discovered that individuals with IDD are 4 to 10 times at greater risk of becoming victims of crime. or being involved in crime in some way. Children with IDD are 3 to 4 times more likely to experience abuse. And statistically, persons with IDD represent anywhere between 4 and 10% of the incarcerated population across the United States. That is a wide range percentage-wise because there's not a lot of clear data out there. You heard earlier this morning that we've just started here in the last 6 months collecting information regarding IDD and their interaction with GIA and with the jail. And so we're really at the front edge of really collecting that data and being able to create good systems to support individuals as they interact with criminal justice. Acog also has a law enforcement training program that's specific to IDD. So we call it our IDD Recognition and Response Program. And that's been designed specifically for law enforcement officers. We have a couple of variations of the program right now, but that the full program can be a two-way immersive interactive training where as a group of individuals with IDD go through a training program and watch a video and are learning about law enforcement officers, and then law enforcement officers are also separately watching some videos, going through some training about IDD, and then the two come together and are able to interact. And it is really amazing and awesome and provides a way for both the people with IDD as well as the law enforcement officers to interact with each other in a non-threatening environment when it's not a critical incident, right, that's happening in the community. It's not the law enforcement officer approaching the person on the street. One of the things that we have found with individuals with IDD is they can be very curious, right? They see police officers on TV. There's social media and different movies and shows that really glorify police work, which is great, but then the person with IDD might really want to reach out and touch the officer's service weapon, or they might want to try to grab the handcuffs. And so this training provides an opportunity for them to interact and be able to be shown the different equipment without it being a situation that might trigger a reaction from the law enforcement officer out in the community when they're responding to a call. So it's really an awesome program. And we have been able to train so far, goodness, over 600 SAPD officers just this year with that program. Big thanks to John Sabo and the mental health unit. They're contracted with us and are trained to provide this training, and so they provide it for SAPD. We've also been training Bexar County Sheriff's officers through the Sheriff's Police Academy, and we've gone around the state. We've gone to multiple different areas of the state to provide this training, and we recently had outreach from the Department of Public Safety for the San Antonio and Austin regions. And so we're working with them to arrange training times that meet their needs. So we're really excited about the outcomes that this training can provide. And so continuity of care. So some of you may be aware about the continuity of care query. This is a process that's been in place for many years in regards to mental health, and it's a database data match between the jail system database and Health and Human Services database on mental health services, so that both the jail gets notified and the local mental health authority get notified when a person with a history of mental health has been arrested and booked into jail. Health and Human Services finally got funding from the legislature this past session to implement that for the intellectual and developmental disability population. So that went into effect in September. And so in the past 6 months, in September, I guess we're a little past 6 months now, but that's where that number came that the commissioner mentioned this morning, is the number of matches that have been made through that continuity of care query. And so now that we have that process in place, as the local IDD authority, Acog has been able to work closely with the team at the GIA and at the jail to help with identifying and confirming those data matches, help making sure that once a person is confirmed with IDD, that we request that they be removed from the general population. So that that's done in an intent to help make sure that they're not victimized by other individuals in jail in the general pop. And then we're able to work with all the different entities involved, the DA, public defenders, the sheriff's office, the criminal magistrate, with trying to develop a plan for that person, to move them through the court system, divert them to community services if that's an option to do so, depending on what their specific charges and needs are. And so there's definitely a lot of work that's being done in this area. I will definitely say this is just in its infancy in our work to really develop a solid system in place to support individuals in order to really help them move back to the community and be successful in the community where possible. And I already talked through some of the bullet points here on this slide, so we'll keep going. And again, our collaborators, the Sheriff's Office, obviously the Department of Behavioral Health there at the county, District Attorney, Public Defender, Criminal Magistrate, University Healthcare System, and of course the Center for Healthcare Services as well. We've all been exceedingly busy working to build a system. And we have a number of accomplishments that we've achieved so far with this process. I won't run through all of these because I see I'm running short on time already, and we have a couple more slides to get through before questions, but they are in the slideshow for you here. And then we also wanted to talk some about guardianship issues today in regards to the IDD population. So this is not intended to walk through the entire guardianship process as much as to focus on the issues that may occur specific to persons with IDD. And so one of the things that we really want to emphasize is that when you're working with someone with IDD, you're working with a population that historically has been disenfranchised of their rights. Prior to 1960, anybody with an intellectual or developmental disability resided in a state-run or federally run institution. And it wasn't until John F. Kennedy initiated legislation that really began to develop the mental health and IDD service system in the community. And then that system has grown and developed over time, but really has not changed significantly in the last 20 or so years. So individuals with IDD, people tend to presume that a person's unable to make decisions for themselves or is unable to complete tasks, or maybe that person struggles to communicate what their desire or intent is. And so many folks will then inappropriately jump to the conclusion that a person needs a guardianship. And ultimately, what's been discovered is that when you take away a person's right to make decisions, then you end up seeing more problem behaviors. When you take away self-determination, people get angry. You know, I'd get angry too if someone told me I couldn't have my coffee in the morning. So when we look at guardianship, we really want to make sure that we're looking at alternatives to that guardianship and ways that the person can be supported without having the full step of moving into a full guardianship and having their rights to make decisions suspended. One of the things that we want to do is look at other options for providing formal or informal assistance that might meet these 4 criteria, because these are really the 4 criteria: needs for food, clothing, and shelter, an individual's physical or mental health, the individual's financial affairs, or making personal decisions. Those are the 4 kind of areas that can really trigger that discussion on guardianship. So if we're able to find alternatives to that, then it removes the need for a person to really have to have a judge put a guardianship in place. So there's a number of supports that are outlined now in law that are potential ways a person can be supported and should be explored prior to jumping into saying that the person needs a guardianship. Those are things like receiving support from trusted family members and friends, applying for Medicaid waiver programs and the supports and services that those programs can provide, receiving quality case management services, engaging in person-centered planning, which is actually something that Acog does with the individual as part of our case management services. Also things like free or reduced meals, food, prescription delivery, reduced or fair or free transportation services, daily calls and supports by a volunteer or maybe an actively involved person in the individual's life, assistance from utility companies, and then technology and adaptive aids that might assist the person in doing things. We may also look at things like services, financial services and support. So looking at direct deposits, if someone has a tendency to go lose their paycheck or sign that paycheck over to somebody else before it gets deposited in the bank, having a direct deposit supports the person and not having that issue happen, or having joint bank accounts where somebody else can monitor the financial situation of the person in order to support them with being successful. Or preloaded debit cards are also another great financial tool. If somebody struggles to manage their money on a regular basis, if you can work with them to do a preloaded debit card for, say, a week at a time with their monthly income, then that can make sure that that income lasts through the month. So those are all alternatives that we can look at, as well as those listed here, things like powers of attorney, declarations for mental health, representative payees. All of these are different options that really should be explored prior to jumping into guardianship for the individual. And then I mentioned person-centered planning. So person-centered planning is an ongoing process of discovery and problem solving in the person's life to help develop a plan that supports the individual's goals, the person's goals, and what they want to achieve in their life. So a quality person-centered planning is something that can support the person in avoiding the need for a guardianship. Also, a supported decision-making agreement is one of those items that's outlined in law as a way to support a person without requiring a guardianship or an alternative to guardianship. And so a supported decision-making agreement is a written document that does not need a lawyer to set it up. In fact, I believe I have included here, a template and the link for where you can find that template online. But basically, it's a pre-agreed arrangement between the person and whoever their supporter is that will assist them in making decisions. It is different than a power of attorney in that it's not giving the supporter any decision-making abilities, but the supporter is assisting the person with understanding what the decision is and the implications of a decision, and then maybe helping to communicate that person's decision back to whoever you're working with. And this can be used and is important in healthcare arenas and financial arenas, with mental health, etc. And it has been described as being like a power of attorney light. The key difference, again, is the person retains the decision-making power and not the supporter. Where with the power of attorney, the person you're identifying really gains that ability to make decisions for you. And then the other big issue that we see with guardianships, if someone has gone through the guardianship process, is that annual requirement to submit a report back to probate court and potentially paying an annual bond. We see a lot of guardians that are not either are not good with following through with this or don't have the financial resources to follow through with this. So it's something that we monitor with families and work with them on a regular basis to help make sure that they stay in compliance with the probate court. So that winds up the presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
Thanks, Jacob. Oh, I see that Warren was unmuting himself. We did have a couple questions in the chat, and then Warren, if you do have a question, go ahead and stick it in the chat. It looks like, Warren, your question about Miss Pahola did get addressed. They were giving a shout out to Pahola, Jacob, asking if she was still there. And so please share our gratitude for Pahola and all the work she does. But one of the questions that came up was from Mr. Michael Young with the Public Defender's Office, asking if you could comment on the interplay between someone who is IDD and has an IQ maybe of 40 and their ability to understand the legal process and their capacity to understand and entering a legal or a plea of guilty.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's a difference between you know, a person being able to make decisions in their life and necessarily being competent to stand trial, and I believe that's where this question is driving at. So one of the things that we're working on with all the different criminal justice entities is making sure that the criminal magistrates alerted when an individual might need a competency evaluation. And so just because a person has, say, a diagnosis of an intellectual disability is not an indicator of whether or not they're competent to stand trial for whatever the criminal charge may be. So we always want to make sure, and we're working on a process to try to get ahead of that a little bit and trigger the court to request competency evaluations so that the psychological assessor can then determine, and it's a different psychological assessor than Acog uses to determine eligibility for IDD services. They have some additional specialized training, and that competency evaluator will determine if the person's competent to stand trial or not.
Thank you, Jacob. And Michael, let us know if you had any follow-up questions to that. Another question, I mean, you started to talk about what Acog is doing with crisis services and in the jail, but there was a question specifically about the services that Acog provides to incarcerated individuals.
So at this point in time, there are not many direct services that we provide to individuals that are incarcerated. While they're incarcerated, the jail or their place of incarceration is providing those direct services. But what we are doing is we're providing case management still for those individuals. So we're communicating with the jail staff, making sure that they're aware of the person's medical or mental health diagnoses, so that they can be getting the necessary medical and mental health supports that they need while they're incarcerated. And then we are coordinating closely on that case management side with the district attorney, with the public defenders, with the court to determine if there's an option to transition that person to a community program. Some individuals that are incarcerated that we get notified on may not have been ever enrolled in IDD services. They may have never had contact with Acog before. And so if it's a minor charge, then we're going to advocate, one, for getting that assessment done to determine if they're eligible for publicly funded IDD services. And then if possible, if there's a way to then divert them from jail into outpatient treatment with Acog so that we can get them enrolled in one of those service programs.
Thank you, Jacob. And I guess the other thing, I mean, Jacob mentioned they still do some care coordination and case management. I would say that's like the understatement of the century. Acog works very, I think I saw Sally Unkefer on here. There's a lot of meetings and care coordination that happens. Like, so if we know that there's somebody in the jail who has an IDD diagnosis, Acog does a lot of work to help us confirm, do they have the diagnosis? Do they have all the assessments that they need? They help us make sure that happens, and then help with the heavy lifting of trying to figure out now what services can we get in place. So we do have a lot of meetings around that. And then we do, and forgive me, Jacob, if you mentioned this, we have started, once the CCQ matching started back in September, we started meeting monthly. Maybe we've gone to every other month for an IDD justice involved meeting with various stakeholders that are involved in that process. So if there's anybody on here who, if you are not currently involved in those meetings and you would like to be, I certainly invite you to send me an email and we'd be happy to plug you into that as well.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Jessica. I think I had that on my slide, but in the interest of time, I kind of skipped over the different achievements that group has made. Let me see if I can scroll back to that real quick, because we have made quite a bit of progress. We have established processes for that notification between Acog and the jail and GIA. We formalized our communication processes between the various groups. We've established that monthly meeting that Jessica was just mentioning. We have a process in place to divert a person to IDD crisis respite if it's available when the person's at GIA and they're being booked. If we can divert that at that point without the person having to be fully booked into jail, we will certainly try to do that if it's appropriate. We've provided specific one-on-one training with the social workers at the public defender's office as well as the district attorney's office on IDD services and supports, as well as, in addition to our criminal justice involved meeting, we've been having another monthly meeting that's a separate call with the Center for Healthcare Services, staffing any outpatient competency restoration cases that we both mutually share, individuals that may have a comorbid IDD and mental health diagnosis and also have criminal justice involvement. And then we've also, through that group, worked with CHCS to clarify how we can get individuals with IDD potentially access to psychiatric medication management. That's one of the big struggles and gaps in the community for the IDD population that has that co-occurring mental health diagnosis, is accessing psychiatric services. And so the center was fantastic in sitting down with us and really mapping out which populations are appropriate for which of their clinic services and how we would move somebody through that process in partnership between the two agencies. So all of those are huge wins, I think, in just a 6-month period of time. I think we've really accomplished a lot. And as I said, are just in the infancy. I think we have a lot more to do as we move forward.
And Jacob, I know we're running short on time, but we do have one more question. Mark is asking, how can we get more information about group homes and apply to get someone in? Are all these housing options on the Acog website?
And I'm sorry, Jessica, part of that audio cut out on me on that question. Can you repeat it, please?
Yes, sir. How can we get more information about the intermediate group homes and apply to get someone in? Are all these housing options on the Acog website?
So yes, all the housing options are listed on the Acog website. To get somebody into an intermediate care facility, the first thing you want to do is contact that intake number that I listed on a previous slide, 210-832-5020. Again, that's 210-832-5020. Because in order to get to that intermediate care facility, we first need to determine the person is eligible for IDD services. And then once we determine that eligibility, we can work with the individual and with the involved stakeholders to put an application packet together for the intermediate care facilities in the area.
Thank you, Jacob. Well, we are, one more question. Are there Spanish-speaking intake workers?
Yes, absolutely. We do have bilingual English-Spanish intake workers available.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacob. If you all have additional questions, please put them in the chat and I'll make sure that they get to Jacob and we can get all your questions answered. Fantastic presentation, Jacob. Thank you.